mostly monthly. I'll start that again. Thanks everybody for coming to Greening USA's mostly monthly green bag lunch presentation. And today we're going to have part two of the Onondaga County chip fab development, sustainability and environmental overview. My name is John Prespiora. I'm a founding board member of Greening USA. In my past life, I worked as an engineer. I guess that means I'm still kind of an engineer, though I'm not registered as a professional engineer anymore, but I guess I still retain that. Diane Brandley is with us today running the Zoom operations. Diane is the president of the board of Greening USA. And just so you know, Greening USA is an all-volunteer organization, 20 years old, promoting sustainability in Central New York. If you like what we do, you can become a member. Nominal dues each year of, I think it's $40 now. If you don't want to be a member, but you like what we do, you can always make donations to us. We'll accept it. We have some minimal expenses, but we do have expenses to operate the organization, even though most of the work we do is by volunteers. And if it behooves you to volunteer to help us out, we'd love to hear from you. So this, I think with that, I can begin going over what I'm going to do today and start talking about this project. Now I gotta move your faces because I can't see my notes. Okay, so recently, at our last month's meeting, we talked about the environmental assessment form that Micron submitted to OSIDA, which is the Onondaga County Industrial Development Agency, for approvals and assistance and undertaking the development of this chip fab project. Since that time, OSIDA circulated the notice to various agencies that they wanted to be lead agent. No objections were submitted to them, so they resolved to become lead agent. And then in September, they issued a positive declaration under the State Environmental Quality Review Act requirements. And they scheduled they received a draft scoping document from Micron, and they scheduled the public input on that scoping document. In fact, the public hearing that they had to do was scheduled just this week, Wednesday evening. The proposed scoping is to narrow issues and ensure that the draft EAS will be concise, accurate, complete document that will then be subject to public review once again. They must ensure public participation. They have to allow open discussion of issues and permit inclusion of relevant substantial public issues in the final written scope. So that's why they issue the draft and then develop the final scope. And the whole point of that is to find out how the scope might be deficient and how they can make it more complete. And so in the final document, and I think this is important in terms of looking at the draft document, in terms of what's missing and how they can, and what needs to be done to make it complete and in compliance with the New York State regulations. So the final scope, when possible, should prescribe the form and extent of analysis of all identified impacts. They have to include a description of the project, a listing of significant potential adverse impacts, define the extent and quality of information and methods to be used in studying those things, provide an initial list of mitigation measures, and they must include potential alternatives that must be studied. And then they have to list information. The final report scope has to list information and data and how that will be incorporated in the document. So this draft document has basically those components in it, although to some degrees maybe not complete. But this document pretends to comply with with working towards getting the final scoping document complete. So that process, as I said, was started on September 20th, which means the public comment period is open to October 20th. So one more week to submit written comments. The information is here on this slide. There was the public hearing. I'm going to try to run for you. I thought this was kind of interesting. Let's see if we can show this. I have no idea how I'm going to get back to my slides, but we'll figure that out once we get there.
John, you may need to cut and paste that into a browser separately.
So if you cut and paste it into a browser, John, you're going to have to tell Zoom to stop sharing this page and start sharing your browser.
I'm sorry. So this isn't being transmitted?
No.
Correct.
Okay. Sorry about that.
You have to close what you're showing and open the browser as a separate share.
Can you just provide that link to, we can watch it later?
Yes, we can get that. We can get that link into the into the share. Why don't I move on, and then maybe at the end I can come back to it and restart this. So
yeah, John, why don't you copy and paste that link into the chat box, and then people who are interested in watching it can watch it separately.
Yeah. I can do it. First of all, I got to find out how to get back to Zoom. And sorry about this, gang. We should have practiced this one. Oh,
You are still sharing the presentation, so we can all see that.
You can, but I can't. Yes. Okay. Here we go. No. I'm going to stop share, I guess, and unless.
Can you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen?
Yeah, I'm just going to do it all over again. I'm sorry. Here we go. All right, sorry about that, and for taking that time. If we can, we will come back to that link. If I can open the chat. I can try to get, oh, no, John, I don't want to do that. All right,
Let's just go ahead. We can do it
yeah,
later.
too many things, too many things. Okay, and the other part of the scoping process is that OSIDA has a responsibility to to read every comment and consider them as they develop the final scope of this project. They don't have to agree with all the comments. And so the document itself includes a description of the project, which they say it's a 1,400 acre. Most of you know most of these things, especially if you were attending our last green bag lunch. So 1,400 acres, 4 planned chip factories, each covering 1.2 million square feet of land. Each, the size of these things are enormous. In addition to the 4 factories, there will be electrical water system improvements necessary, and plus they will build an employee health center and a child care center and some utility line necessary for the project. Here's a rundown of the energy. There will be a 16-inch diameter gas main will need to be built, extensions of fiber optic mains, water treatment, pretty significant wastewater conveyance facilities, 4 30-inch lines. There'll be a rail spur that they will need. The Onondaga County water system needs to be improved to supply all the water for this project. Micron proposes to create 9,000 high-paying jobs by 2045, and then they estimate that there's an additional 40,000 community jobs expected over the 20 plus years of build out. Section 3 of this document describes the purpose and need, kind of the justification of why this is all being done. And they cite basically 2 things. One, the United States need for domestic memory chip manufacturing and its policies, and the New York State and the Onondaga County's goal of enhancing growth and jobs in the community. A part of this section also includes the history, a 30-year history of Onondaga County efforts to develop this White Pine Commerce Park. And if you're unfamiliar, that's up on Route 31 at Codnoy Road. They've been working on this for a long time, and it was just a year ago that it was announced that Micron would like to develop their project there. Section 4 is the required discussion of alternatives. They have a sort of an extensive kind of history of sites that were considered by New York State to try to develop manufacturing of chips in New York State. There's a rundown of alternative sites and design that Onondaga County had considered over the years. And then there's the primary section of that for the DEIS, or the draft environmental impact statement, of the alternatives that are proposed to be required to be analyzed. And so we've got the no action alternative, like do nothing, remain vacant land. The build alternative is to build the four fabs over the 20-year build out period, and then there will be interim analysis based on these timeline, and then a reduced scale alternative. Okay, what happens if maybe the project gets scaled back to only 2 of the fabs? So the process will have to consider the impacts of all of these alternatives as OSIDA tries to make a decision on what to be done. So draft 5 is kind of the guts of the the report though, or section 5 of this draft. It's the analysis framework. It's based on the New York State law and regulations about what has to be included in the DEIS. Importantly, the DEIS must consider direct and indirect implications. So that means short-term and long-term effects of the proposed project, but also must include cumulative impacts as applicable. Cumulative might be including growth that happens in the community as a result of adding this massive manufacturing facility here and the jobs that it's going to require. Mitigation is an important part of the DEIS, listing how they plan to deal with any potential impacts. So what is this? 7 pages are included, and 21 categories are described. Everything from land use to unavoidable adverse impacts will be considered. And my plan is to go through each of these things as quickly as possible to give you an overview of what all this, how Micron and OSIDA have drafted this document to specify what has to be evaluated as part of the environmental impact statement. So this is kind of the recipe for what has to be done here. So land use, zoning, and public policy. They're going to assess those items. They're going to identify reasonable development projects that are going to happen simultaneously. They specify that for this, the study area will be the town of Clay, town of Cicero, and Onondaga County. They're going to describe and evaluate changes in land use that result from this project. So this is kind of an important section. I guess they have included Onondaga County, which I presume that means the city of Syracuse, but the city of Syracuse is not mentioned specifically. And so I think the study area is a little bit ill-defined. But I think, based on the requirements of the environmental impact process, it will involve and should involve direct and indirect cumulative impacts. They do mention something about a Oswego water supply plan, which I have no idea what they mean by those initials. Community recreation or community facilities and open space and recreation is lumped together into a broad section on community services. So they're going to assess the impacts on police, fire, emergency services. They're going to assess the building code requirements, in terms of citing this project on the site and those building code requirements. Parks and recreation facilities, how they might be affected by this, particularly, the growth or directly by such things as traffic and other things will be assessed. And, this, again, I think they defined the project area, I think, narrowly for this, but hopefully it gets adjusted so there's some clarification in the final document of what the project study area will be. There's disparate elements included here, and it might be better to just kind of separate them into separate sections for clarity. at this point in the document, there's no mention of how they're going to determine the population trends, but that happens later. So this comment I put here was kind of premature. But I do see that there's no mention of hospital and healthcare services here. So those kind of things might be ripe for comments by the public. But so this socioeconomic conditions element does talk about direct and indirect effects on the population. So this
Don,
is,
can I jump in for just a moment?
Sure.
Because one of our participants has asked whether these comments are your comments, or are these, are these your comments? And the
Yeah,
answer is, I just want to briefly answer that question, which is Green USA has been informally working with other like-minded groups, and we are trying to put together written comments that will be submitted by the October 20th deadline for written comments. So that's what this is about, really. We're putting some of our own comments from our organizations out there, and we are asking you if there are other concerns that should be included in these written comments that we're submitting.
Yeah. Thanks, Diane, for pointing that out and raising that question. Yeah, I am not watching the chat, so please feel free to interrupt me if there's something important that I need to be stopped for. I appreciate that. But yes, and I agree with everything Diane said. But for the most part at this point, these are kind of my observations on it, and so just to spur your curiosity and your own thinking about it. I might be totally off base in terms of some of these things. It's kind of a complicated document, and it's kind of a complicated process. But from my point of view, these comments are what I see as maybe the deficiencies about this. But I did think that this section was fairly comprehensive, and the study area listed was appropriate. Let's see, what did I say here about the data sources, which the document, the scoping is supposed to list data sources and how they will utilize those data sources, based on modeling or generally accepted principles. So that would be another thing that you could comment on, is that the technique that they are using perhaps is not sufficient, that there are more advanced tools available. So those things would be fair for the public, especially if they have some expertise, to submit to the county and saying, wait a minute, you're off base here. Environmental justice will be another major element, and they have to consider the direct pollution effects on disadvantaged communities. There are some standards cited here, and I'm not familiar with these standards, but it seems like they've included appropriate description of how this element will be analyzed and written about. Historic and cultural resources is another significant element, and that is that has some specific standards, and they did a good job with this element describing those particular standards. A New York State Historic Preservation Act documents, and they're in listing who they will consult with. I would say, if you're an expert in these areas, I'd ask you to read the original document and then submit comments to the county, whether you agree or would suggest changes to what has been proposed. Visual impacts and community.
Excuse me, John. How do you get the document?
Okay, so I'm glad you raised that. I planned to put that in the chat before I started, and I kind of forgot I forgot to do that. I will get that in the chat. The Onondaga County Industrial Development Agency has a web page specific to Micron, and they list various documents that are available for the public to read. So I will get that link in the chat, and if I don't, remind me later when I can get through these documents and I turn it over to you to discuss this. So visual impacts and community character, it will be evaluated. I think what they've written is largely related to what happens when you plunk down this major manufacturing facility on Route 31 in Conway Road. What will that do to the character of that area and the vistas that people may have come to rely on? I think that the community character is important in terms of the growth potential of the community. I've heard numbers bandied around. That's the Central New York region will see a population growth, over 100,000, new residents. I think that's the number that was bandied around. What does that mean in terms of changing community character? I know Rick Sparta is here today, and hopefully he can talk about this a little bit more when I finish the overview. Geology, soils, and topography. In this section, I would like to see additional detail to define exactly what surveys the Micron will do as part of the investigation of the site. They're kind of a little unclear. They're going to rely on USDA soil survey data that's already available. But they talk about doing a property survey, which kind of has many definitions, and I think they need to be a little more specific about that. And it's particularly related to the natural resources. They did talk in the EAF about doing a identification on site. I think what they've written here is related to that, but it is a little bit unclear how extensive this will be. But my guess is it will be very extensive. Certainly, there will be wetlands permits that will need to be issued, and the DEC and the Army Corps of Engineers as involved agencies, although Army Corps of Engineers is not technically involved in the state review process, they would be involved in the federal review process. So they're going to require extensive work on wetlands and habitat type issues. So this is probably sufficiently complete. But if there are comments from experts, I would encourage you to submit them. Solid waste and hazardous materials. This has got a lot of attention at the public hearing the other day. Received a lot of attention from Don Hughes, which I failed and tried to show you in the Spectrum clip. They kind of lumped together how they're going to handle solid waste, which seems to be kind of comprehensive in terms of they're going to describe their how much solid waste, how they're going to handle it, and those kind of things. But they also lump in hazardous materials here, including the phase 1 environmental site review that will be done. But lacking in here is I thought I had a second slide on it. And I guess maybe it's this bullet point that I wrote. They're going to identify hazardous materials, including chemicals that will be stored on site, that will be used, stored, transported, or generated. And they're going to have to specify measures to protect against release in the environment. I mean, there's a lot in that short statement, but I think that statement could be expanded to make sure all the bases are covered in terms of this potentially significant impact, in terms of worker safety. What does that mean in terms of the chemicals that they're going to have? Will they be divulging to the public? What's going to be stored on site? And, all of the transportation issues of those materials and the safety and the risk to the community, I think, are a very important issue. So transportation is something, and I think this is probably fairly complete. The New York State DOT and the Onondaga County DOT will be involved in, reviewing this. Some of the analytical tools are fairly well specified here in terms of the modeling that's available that they will use, the model that the SMTC has prepared. So they do, I think, a good job talking about the transportation element. Certainly, if there are specific concerns with transportation issues, the public should talk about those and kind of list any specific areas that need to be resolved. I know one thing that comes up is public transportation, which likely will be listed as a mitigating effect of it. And so there needs to be, potentially a robust public transportation system to get people to and from this site. Air quality will be a major component of this. It'll be broken down into mobile and construction air quality issues, and there's some modeling that's available that they will use, but they'll also need a stationary source air pollution control permit from the DEC, and there are particular standards that have to be complied with in order to get this permit. Greenhouse gas and climate change elements is, I know, near and dear to the hearts of many of us here. They will estimate greenhouse gas emissions. They will describe facility design features that will minimize those things. I suppose they didn't mention the lead standards that they plan to utilize here, but I think that's kind of rolled into this general statement of describing facility design features. So analytical techniques are listed here in terms of motor vehicle emissions simulation. I'm not an expert in these techniques, but they do list a couple of other things. But particular attention is to this MOVES modeling, and they say that they will follow the New York State's climate change. I think I forgot the CPA control legislation that was passed recently. Okay, noise and vibration is an important subject when you're talking about a manufacturing facility, but also during construction. So they will assess that. These are the standards that they have listed. So these aren't my comments. These are standards and methods that they list. It seems to be fairly comprehensive, in terms of the noise effects of the project. But and then utilities and infrastructure, they're going to assess the potential to adversely affect the larger community in terms of impacts to water, stormwater, and sanitary sewer infrastructure. This is, this is kind of a big deal because there's a lot of infrastructure development that has to happen. The methodology of this assessment needs a little more definition. What are the parameters for doing that? I think they need to look at the capacity, any level of service changes or maybe inconveniences that the public will need to, be faced with. But more importantly, the fiscal implications. Is the community going to have to pay for this development of additional public infrastructure? And what about the impacts on the water bodies? Will be short-term or and long-term impacts? We need to know about all those things. They don't include the gas main here, but the gas main is another piece of public infrastructure or utility infrastructure that will need to be constructed according to the documents. Energy is going to be evaluated. I think this is related to other aspects of it, but they really need to consider both local and regional and statewide impacts to the energy system. Can we really produce enough electrical energy to service this thing? And what does that mean in terms of New York State's progress towards reducing greenhouse gases? And construction impacts. Are going to be a lot of construction for many, many years. So this is kind of key. They don't really provide any data sources or methodology here. Maybe they're kind of subsumed in other aspects of this report, such as the noise or the air quality and the traffic implications. So perhaps the biggest problem with the document is how it's organized, and and maybe some of those things could be reorganized to make it clear to the public of how they're going to approach analyzing all of these issues. Certainly, they need to take a look at local codes and regulations that might affect their construction activities. So then we get kind of these, I kind of call them like meta sections. So this is indirect and cumulative. So the impacts that we've already talked about will have short-term and long-term and cumulative effects. And so they need to sort of look at all of them from those various different points of view. And this is kind of, where I kind of said, this document is just written a little bit unclear, perhaps a good first draft, but it needs to be, maybe organized, a little bit better than it is. Growth inducing aspects is kind of that whole thing related to the socioeconomic conditions and the population growth. It seems like, they wrote this element and they specifically refer to jobs. They want to, tell us how this project will create employment opportunities, direct and indirect employment opportunities. But certainly there are other more, other significant growth inducing aspects of this project that need to be listed in the scope so they don't get overlooked. And then there's these several other categories, which again, I think I don't know if the right word is the meta elements, but they're going to have a section and to where they list unavoidable adverse impacts that cannot be reasonably mitigated. That's kind of related to irreversible and irretrievable commitment of resources, which is another section that they write. They say typically this entails the use of building materials and energy that are committed to the project. But aside from building materials and energy, I think other irretrievable impacts which should be included here might be resources consumed in the manufacturing process. I mean, and that might have an international or national implication. You know, the land devoted to this project certainly is a resource that will be, of course, is going to be discussed someplace else, but certainly we need to understand that it'll most likely be irretrievable in terms of the use of this land again, the water consumed in the manufacturing process, and then the changes, you know, in the water. What kind of long-term pollution effects may occur from this project? I suppose that also applies to air quality. So I think there could be significant irretrievable or irreversible impacts if this is not done correctly. And then another section is the mitigation section. So, which is really listed as the last section in this section 5.3, the last chapter, where they're going to summarize all the mitigation. Again, that's kind of related to each of the foregoing major substantive sections. And so then section 6 of this report lists the involved agencies and the interested agencies that have, you know, that they will keep in communication with it. I think the important thing about this is the involved agencies have some permit authority over this project. And so they can, well, this is going to be a coordinated review being led by Onondaga County's Industrial Development Agency. These involved agencies have an independent role and give some cover and some support to their specific areas of expertise, you know, such as the DEC and you know, in terms of air quality and water, the parks, the New York State parks, in terms of historic preservation. So in you know, in one sense, the process is kind of at the mercy of the Onondaga County Industrial Development Agency, but on the other hand, these other involved agencies play a role and give the public some support in terms of getting this right. There are some federal agencies that will be involved in this project, and while they won't be considered involved agencies in the New York State SEQRA process, the New York State review process, they should be involved in the federal review process of this. So the takeaways that I see from this review, I think the draft scope is somewhat comprehensive, though not complete. The lead agency will revise it and issue the final scoping document to guide the development of the draft environmental impact statement. Public input, though, is important to identify deficiencies in the draft scope. Public comments must be considered by the OSIDA, the lead agent. And you have until October 20th to do that in writing. And it might be helpful to have some media attention, which maybe that plays in. Don Hughes and the few of us that attended the public hearing on Wednesday night were able to garner a little bit of media attention. But between now and the 20th, maybe we can get a little bit more so the public is fully aware of this project and what might be at stake. And I think that's my last slide, so I can stop share now, and I can show. I'm going to check the time, and see if we have time. And I think we're pretty good. I think I might try to share that video clip now again.
Don, I posted the link to that video clip so that those who are interested after the meeting can go ahead and look at it.
Okay, so we can do it that way if that's fine for people. And we can let all of you have an opportunity to ask questions and provide some, maybe some additional insights into what I've presented here. So yeah, I would love to have you do that, and maybe at the end, if there's time, we can do it if people want to do it. But yeah, go ahead and take a look at it. And so I'm going to. I see a hand up already. Let me just say, you can either raise your hand using the Zoom tools on the bottom, or put a comment in chat, either specifically or the word question, and we will try to get to your question and ask it for you, or recognize you to ask your question. So the first one I see up, I see Diana Green's hand up. So Diana, go ahead.
Are they going to use any evidence of Micron's operations elsewhere in the world for any of these concerns and reviews?
And that's a good point. In the review of this scoping document, it doesn't mention that. I mean, but I didn't see it in there where they've included the background on Micron. Now, in this document, there's some history, as I mentioned, about Onondaga County's efforts to develop the White Pine Park, about New York State's efforts to attract chip fabs to New York State. But I don't think there's a historical description of Micron's previous experiences. And so it may be useful to have that available in that. And so I think it's a good point. I don't know if anybody here has, a comment.
Can I jump in with a comment about that? Because
yeah, sure.
This is Don Hughes. I've got my video off just to conserve bandwidth. This is a very new technology. It uses what they call extreme ultraviolet for etching the chips. So I think, past experience, I don't know how relevant that really is going to be. You'd have to look at maybe other manufacturers that are using this technology. I don't know of anyone that is currently using it.
Oh.
But certainly there are other chip fabs around.
Micron hasn't been using it, huh?
Not that I'm aware of. Not this specific technology. But
well, I mean,
it's past semiconductor manufacturing is certainly relevant, and unfortunately, the semiconductor industry does not have a great track record with respect to toxic substances.
Okay, well, then it could be maybe more general to the industry, because a lot of the questions I have, like about air quality, noise, construction, forever chemicals, is, what information do we have about what we would expect in terms of air quality, for example?
Yeah,
what kind of pollutants will there be?
Yeah, I think you raise a good point about the reputation the company and the reputation of other facilities, and information about those effects, effects from other facilities, I mean, might be relevant to be understood by the public, whether it's technically required under the state environmental review law, but I suppose to the extent that it supports Micron's application, that they can do this project without significantly affecting the environment. I suppose Micron would be interested in disclosing all that kind of material to the degree that it shows a different story. I suppose the public deserves to have that on the record somehow. I don't know how we've, forced to get it on it, but that's a good point. And the group that's preparing some comments might consider to include that in ours. But Diana, I would encourage you to submit that to the county, to possibly include in the DEIS some background material on similar facilities and that's this company's track record in particular. They can, the more that the county knows about what the community is concerned with, I think the better. They can ignore you, but I think it's also good to get it on the record.
So John, Rick Martin has had his hand up for a while.
Great, Rick, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I thought overall the scoping document was very complete in terms of the elements that they covered. The problem is there are at least three major issues that I can think of that really need maybe more exacting methodologies or approaches. One is that Senator Rachel May and I are very concerned about the amount of water and energy usage and the use of green infrastructure to mitigate that. I think it's sort of rudimentary in terms of what they're proposing. We need much more detail on that. Second issue is the wetlands are going to be a major issue in terms of the permitting, in terms of the wetland area, especially if they expand out to the second phase, the two other plants or footprints. And the third issue that you and I have talked about is community and cumulative growth. This is going to be a major issue, and how they need to specify how they're going to do that.
Limited operations, they say. Targeted operations inside Gaza.
Thank you.
And they say the hostages believed to be held captive by Hamas. And what does it mean for the civilians caught in the middle?
Somebody has got something playing.
Looks like Eric, I think. Might be Eric's phone.
And I see the host muted me too. Maybe she tried to mute everybody. I don't know. But please keep your microphone muted until you're called on. That would be appreciated. Thanks, Richard, for that insightful comment. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I see another hand up. I see Don Hughes is up again.
Yeah, hi. I want to go back to the you talked about the solid waste and hazardous waste generation. And in my opinion, that's one of the weaker parts of the scoping document. I know from your previous presentation, John, you had a figure of 45,000 tons of solid waste were anticipated, which is that's significant. That's like 15% increase on what we generate in Onondaga County. And I would wonder, what's the nature of this stuff? We incinerate solid waste here. And if you incinerate things like Teflon, and I know that they are planning to use a lot of that stuff, that does not bode well for air quality. So I would want them to look at that. And the other thing related to hazardous materials, and this is a tough nut to crack because some of the things, it may be proprietary what they're using, but on the other hand, the community has a right to know what is being used, because some of that's going to be emitted into the environment. Nothing's 100% captured. Perfluorinated compounds is one particular area that I'm concerned about. I was just looking at the DEC's air guide for perfluorinated compounds. They have 12 listed, and they're basically all the same thing. It's all perfluorooctanoic acid. And there are thousands of these compounds. So we need to get a better handle on what specifically is being used and how is it going to be regulated. A lot of these things are also very potent greenhouse gases. So there's a lot that needs to be ferreted out here. And I'm afraid that looking at other facilities may not be that useful because this is such a new technology.
Mhm. Thank you, Don. I see Bob Haley with his hands raised.
Thank you. I just unmuted. I hope it works. I wanted to, thanks, just make two very kind of simple and very large comments. I thought the first one is, of course, details are so difficult, as Don just mentioned. There's one very specific concern of his, a particular type of process or waste and the amount. Those are details. They're massive within this overall review of environmental impact. I like Diana's point. In other words, we are generalists in the sense of environmental responsibility globally. So I liked her comment in the sense of asking Micron, what are the standards for environmental impact you use in all of your other sites? In that statement of an assessment, you will see contextual reality to what they had to deal with in terms of legal implications or even review, as well as environmental. That would be very helpful to see what they did address or didn't address, or their capability. Let's not put it in the negative, let's put it in the positive. Their capability, which I believe is huge, to address specific context and specific regulatory environments. Now, having said that, I want to go to the point about who the lead agency is. John, is the lead agency CIDA?
The lead agent is CIDA.
CIDA, fine. Okay, so the key here is who is the lead agency in terms of managing all of the reviewing policies. Again, we've spent 10 to 15 years with the DOT I-81 process and all of the different agencies reviewing it. And the lesson from that is these are overlapping and uncoordinated impacts. And as an example, historic preservation section 106 for years dealt with speaking to Oakwood Cemetery as an impact, historically, environmentally, naturally, as well as
Hold on a second, Bob. Yeah,
Can't
hold
hear
on
you.
a second, Bob, because somebody is at their microphone open and are taking another call or something. Because what you're saying is important. Eric, can you close your microphone? Thank you. Okay, so what you're saying is important.
Thank you. Sorry, John, did you want to, I can't hear your comments, John.
Yeah, I was just going to say what you're saying is important. So skip back a few seconds and restate that, please. Yeah,
well, I was just going into the second point, so thank you for that. With our history of dealing with the EIS for I-81, 10 serious years, many more years before that, the lead agency was key, and also all of the agencies' coordination was critical. We found that through the State Historic Preservation Office, the Section 106 would not somehow leverage the Oakwood Cemetery's environmental, historical, and really the history of the city, as well as the monuments, as well as the natural environment and the I-81 impact. Would not bring that into the scope of impact by the DOT. That was a huge, just huge. We made all the comments, we made all the statements, but it was never brought into the project. So one of these issues is, how are these different agencies and their standards being coordinated for this specific project? That's an area where you need an overview that goes up past all the individual agencies to bring it to a much higher standard of coordination. And that's just a general comment. Sorry, it's very difficult, but very important to deal with the standards, not just in the detail point, but across the board overall for the region and for the long-term history. Another one, the last thing I wanted to say, John, I'm so sorry, but is that we are talking about these environmental standards on this date, whatever we are, good old Friday the 13th here in 23. However, we've talked about this as a long-range project, 20 years. The standards will change during that 20-year process. They should be looked at as going towards higher standards than what we have today in terms of coordination or water or long-term impact on growth. It's a very different project than most projects. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I suppose related to that last one is the need, I suppose, for future supplemental reviews prior to the expansion of the project beyond, say, 1 or 2 fabs to go to number 3 and 4. I guess I don't recall what the intention has been, but in the section on alternatives, analysis, and the timing of the studies, they do make some reference to the interim study points, but I don't know if that includes doing those studies today for those interim points, or if that means revisiting those interim points. So that point, I think, needs to be clarified in this whole process. So thank you for those insightful comments. Who else has something to say or a question we can try to address? Okay, I see hand up, physical hand up by Diana.
Yeah, if anybody here has any information on the air quality concerns of this proposed project, I would really like to know. And in terms of OSIDA, which I think is such an essential part of this whole process, if you could give us an insight into the key players on OSIDA.
That's a great question that I actually started thinking about that very thing last night, in terms of my thinking was along the lines is how can OSIDA, or how will OSIDA manage the review of this document? Do they have the expertise or the sort of intention that is in the interest of their community? I think you raise a good point. And at one time I did try to get OSIDA, even before they declared the lead agent. This goes back probably a couple of months. I did invite them to come to a green bag lunch. And at that point, their executive director told me that it was too premature to have them because they're not lead agent yet. And so I kind of took that to assume that, well, maybe they didn't want to come. But last night I was thinking of, maybe I should have invited OSIDA to come to this meeting today, or we could get them. But I think that's an important issue. I don't know if they have consultants that will help them, work through this. There certainly is a conflict of interest in this. They're kind of a partner with the Micron, even though they're a kind of a funding agency and thing, but they're really a partner to Micron in this whole process. So how do you separate their interest to be sort of successful with this project, and the community's interest to be successful and being developed in a sustainable, just, equitable, environmentally safe manner? That's a very good question, and I don't have the answer for you today, but I think we need to stay on that point. And
Yeah, I can just, I know that OSIDA, the history at least of the fact that they have encouraged and accepted applications for tax rebates and subsidies in lieu of businesses going to the city's agency. And so basically OSIDA has been used as a roundabout to get developers special tax subsidies. So, I mean, I would be very skeptical of them as the lead agency.
Yeah, I see somebody with her hand up, Suli Jane. I don't know if I pronounced it right, but
You're muted.
yeah, go ahead and unmute. And
if you want an agency that you want to keep your eye on when this process is going forward, keep your eye on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, because I was born in Florida, and what they have done to the state of Florida, now this was many years ago, they've just about, with what they have, what has the state of Florida, much of it has been allowed by the state of Florida, but they have almost destroyed the Everglades. They just about destroyed the Kissimmee River. They just about have destroyed Okeechobee Lake. You have to keep someone watching what they do, because they think they know what they're doing, and they're doing it for a totally different purpose. Because they did what the Army Corps of Engineers did in Florida was they catered to the sugar industry, which destroyed Okeechobee Lake, and then they did flood control for the Everglades, and it's just about destroyed the Everglades. Salt intrusion is a real problem down there, but then that's not going to be a problem with the rise of the ocean. So if you want another agency to keep your eyes on with what they're doing with wetland mitigation, we'll need to keep our eyes on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I don't trust them any further than I can pick them up and throw them. Because their record, unless recently it's better, their record is, in my estimation, for environmental impact, is pretty lousy. Just saying.
Yeah. Well, you raise a good point, and I appreciate it, and probably that goes. It might go to all agencies in the pot. All agencies kind of have a mission. There's certainly political entities as well as technical entities. They have to act lawfully when laws are available, and they have to respond, to written, documented public policies and plans that are out there. And so it all gets a little bit nebulous in terms of, what is, what an agency might do. We all realize that. And your case study about Florida is, is an important one to keep in mind. I'm thinking, I was just going to say, I was thinking about that in terms of, the first section. I think it was a public policy and land use planning. One of the major things that this project, the review will be looking at, is what our existing town and county and plans are on the record as far as establishing those community public policies and what their objectives are, and to see if this type of project sort of can be accommodated within those things. So all of these things kind of fit together into a puzzle that can get moved around, as you say, by particular agencies. So yeah, you raise a good point. Did you want to follow up on that?
Just one statement. I would say if the Army Corps of Engineers has to submit a plan for remediation of the wetlands, I would like to see that plan before they start shoveling?
Yeah,
I
I mean,
mean,
I think
I
there
think
will
that
need to
should
be
be a
an,
public
yeah.
document.
Yeah, just, but I don't know exactly how the whole process works, but I think there will have to be a permit issued prior to construction
Yeah.
or screwing around with all the wetlands and the land. And so hopefully, there will be that permit that will, list what is allowable and what the plan is. But I guess the watchword is stay tuned,
Yeah, exactly. Just wanted to drop that little watch out for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Great, thank you. I see Don has his hand up again.
I noticed Dave Mankiewicz from Center State CEOs on the Zoom session. Dave, do you have something that you could add?
To what degree, Don?
About
What are you looking for in terms of commentary?
well, about OSIDA and its mission and the role of Center State CEO.
Well, we're not a governmental agency, so we don't have any review power. We don't issue any permits. We don't do any of that. So we certainly can't be involved as a lead agency. That's just not anything that we do. I mean, if you put your finger on it, OCIDA has an interest here. And obviously their interest is to develop the community, and they have purchased the land, so they're going to be a land owner. But at the end of the day, they also have to be responsible because they have to pay attention to New York state law. How they will go about doing their review, I do not know. I think that's something that is a good question when you're talking about, are they bringing on consultants? Are they, how are they going to get into the technical issues of that? That's a question I think you have to put to Bob Petrovich and get some more clearance on it. So John's inclination may be a good one, that you want to get OCIDA to come to a meeting.
Yep. I'm sure they'll use consultants. If no one else has got a hand up, I would like to just make a comparison to the I-81 project, which I did in the interview last night. The I-81 project, which is a far smaller budget than this, looked at lots of different alternatives. And this project has only two alternatives, basically build 2 fabs or build 4 fabs. I-81 looked at viaduct options. There were a number of those, maybe 5 or 6. There were a couple variations on the community grid design. There were a number of tunnel options looked at. And so I would encourage everyone to make the comment that this Micron project, which is much, much bigger financially and certainly will have a bigger environmental impact. If you look at water and energy and housing and hazardous materials and so forth, they should really offer a number of different sub alternatives.
Right, and Bob wants to respond, or go ahead, Bob.
I'm unmuting again. Thank you. No, just as a temper your comment, Don, I agree with your basic intent here. However, Micron as a private developer is very different than the DOT as a complicated state entity, which carried on the project much longer than it ever should have been, at their advantage of huge costs. In other words, they had 17 options in the first round, and they had 2 others that went on forever, and then they studied them. So my point is they're very different kind of entities, but your comment's a good one. If we want alternatives, they probably are, as their third alternative suggested, looking at reduced building options, because the reduced impact is the most significant way that you can, reduce size and volumes and materials would be the best way to reduce environmental impact at this stage, and then learn from that process towards future stages, which is two parts of this overall large impact project. But your comments basically, Don, good. I'm not speaking against what you've said at all, just the differences in the two entities.
So
Yeah.
Bob, while you're unmuted, I see your comment in the chat, and you said regarding environmental standards, we should be looking forward rather than existing standards. I like that comment.
Well,
Want to
again,
expand on that?
well, yeah, it's always hard to do. In other words, we are lifting everything from the past and all of our individual efforts and our usually displeasures with past reactions. That's why we're so angry about things that didn't work well in the past. We bring up and try to make positive comments towards the future, but that's what this is about. And I look at the dynamics of this, and through the I-81 process, again, which was very, very detailed from a community point of view, as well as agencies' point of view. It was always the sad part when the best of those ideas couldn't be included in the project. And the best of those ideas is what comes out of the critique process, which is the review process. So that's what I'm saying about take the standards higher than where we are, look at them fundamentally to the place and the people working in those environments. And we're talking about future people here. We're talking about people that haven't been born that are going to be working in the impact of this overall project. And again, Diane, to flip it back to you, that's where the 7 generations come in. Leave the place better than and cared for by this generation for future generations. And that's a way to beat, well, you can't beat the agency regulations if that's all they hold to. And that's why the lead agency is critical in bringing together more skills in the review process. A better lead agency for this area would be the academic and in science institutions and business institutions for the Cornells, the Syracuses, the environmental, the Syracuse University, Lemoyne, all of our colleges, Clarkson, everybody else, in terms of the best response to this physical place and the impact that's coming. And weave that into these standards. And that's what happens when we talk about something is too big or too little or a technique. It's so hard to get that back into the larger picture. Every detail is important towards that, however.
Yeah, I agree. I was looking at the chat to see if there were some questions there. I think the only thing that I noticed that maybe we haven't related, something Dick asked about in terms of how the information in the DEIS is weighted, if it's weighted at all. And my sort of uninformed notion of it is that everything can be taken into account equally, but the lead agent gets to make a decision whether or not that the DEIS is complete and they're satisfied that they can issue whatever permits or proceed with the action. So it's kind of in the heads of the lead agent, I guess, in terms of how they might weight these various items. Now, certainly there are precedents and standards and legal action or whatever that could arise, from the review and whether or not it's sufficient and whether or not they've acted in accordance with the law and their ability. So I think it's to be seen, I guess, what they will weight. I think the I-81, like Bob has said, is an interesting proceeding case study. Hopefully there can be some rigor in terms of this process to get this right, but who knows, because of we have private sector client and we have a tremendous need on the part of the community to have jobs and that I guess that usually holds a lot of weight, swings a lot of weight. So, Green USA has tried to, for 20 years, work towards educating the community about the need to kind of balance out these things. And, maybe at some point we do have to decide that the risks aren't worth all all the jobs aren't worth the risks that are involved. And we do have to scale this whole thing back. And, maybe the OSIDA, who's kind of the lead in this whole project, will recognize that, but who knows? Who knows? Carol Biesmeyer has her hand up.
I'm sorry, I'm just saying goodbye to everybody. I got it. It's been great.
Well,
Thank you very much, everybody. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Carol, for being here. I'm glad you tuned in. It is 1:24. We're about near the end of the time that we normally allocate for these things. So I think we probably are ready to close out the meeting. Next
Can I just
month,
say one thing?
yeah, go
Which
ahead,
is
Diane.
just summing up a lot of what I've heard here. I think the most urgent question to be asked is, does OSIDA have the expertise to make this review? Will they be bringing in experts in all of these incredibly diverse fields to review these different questions?
Yes, and how is it that OSIDA became the lead agent or whatever agency?
Probably because the county was the one that brokered the deal in the first place. That's a guess.
I mean, so it was McMahon basically who made the decision, probably.
I don't know. I was just guessing.
I would think so, because
But
I
I'll
think
bet Bob Haley knows the answer.
Well, OSIDA has a board of directors, and it's the board. I mean, the board is obviously appointed by probably the county executive or the county legislature, and all of that. And so it is, in a sense, a political body, but they are being asked to do certain activities by the applicant, by Micron, to fund and or buy the land and all of that thing. So they have a role, and in order for them to do the role, they have to play their role. They have to have the environmental review process, and the environmental review process allows any of the involved agencies in the action who might have to take official action to become lead agent. And so OSIDA basically was the first one out of the gate. They volunteered to be the lead agent. They contacted the other potential involved agencies and all the other, and I probably could have included a slide of that information of the contacts and what the responses were, which they were all, it was okay with them, is in the group of documents that is posted on the Micron documents webpage, which is now in the chat. So if you go there, you can see a document that said, responses or something like that from other involved agencies, and all the other involved agencies that replied. I think there were about a half a dozen of them that replied and said it's okay with them that OSIDA serve as the lead agent. And so OSIDA became the lead agent. So I see Bob has his hand up on that point.
Well, I only wanted to thank, number one, I wanted to thank Dave Mankiewicz for his previous comment, because I don't know all the answers by any means that I do know. Dave, I was going to ask you, the differences between a lead agency and their responsibility in drafting and evaluating the EIS, if, Dave, you can, because you've done this, I think, certainly much more than I have, the difference between a DOT as a lead agency and their kind of legal expertise requirement, which was Diane's question. What is the expertise of an agency? How are they equipped, different agencies, to prepare an environmental impact statement? Where does the burden lie, really, in the evaluation of an environmental impact statement with different agencies that may have totally different capabilities? We found that in Syracuse because Rochester was the lead agency on their inner loop renovation not the DOT, and it made an immense difference in who was being listened to and the outcome. So back to the question, Dave, if you can, what is the requirement of these different lead agencies for the expertise needed to do the evaluation that is required by law?
Well, Bob, I appreciate your confidence in me. I'm not a lawyer. So John had it right in terms of describing the process of how somebody becomes a lead agency. And, you know, the 30-day period was in there, and any of the other entities could have challenged OCIDA. New York State DEC could have said, nope, I want this. So they chose not to. And so that's how OCIDA ends up in that role. I get the question you're asking, Bob. What's their requirement to go out and obtain the expertise? Now, of course, all those other agencies who didn't say they wanted to be the lead agency are still in the process. So when the draft environmental impact statement comes forward, New York State DEC is still going to read it. I mean, State Historic Preservation Office is going to go through it. I mean, all those agencies are still going to bring their expertise to the table. And of course, as you well know, they're also looking for the public to bring their expertise, which is where this organization comes in. Because you remember how many times we had to go review I-81, you know, draft environmental impact statements, and they were constantly looking for that. But the core of your question, Bob, I can't answer. So I think that's one. Again, OCIDA does have the attorney. The two OCIDA attorneys were there the other night, and those are probably the right folks to put that question to.
Thank you, David.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. And I think Dave hit the nail on the head in terms of the other involved agencies and their expertise are still part of the process. And so maybe the coordinating body, you know, yields some particular weight in the process, but I'm sure that the expertise and hopefully integrity of the other involved agencies will have a huge say in terms of the various sections that they represent, you know, in this whole process. So I don't think all is lost, particularly if OCIDA doesn't have the expertise in any of these particular technical areas. I think that the process is bolstered, you know, fairly well by the other agencies to the degree we can put our confidence in those other agencies. So anyways, thank you all again for being here. I think we've exhausted what we can do today, but we have a lot of good information to go forward. Don't forget, written comments must be submitted by next Friday. That the link was in the chat for the link to the Micron documents, and in there you can find if you the information of how to submit those comments. I had it on one of my slides, but if you're still having trouble finding how to submit comments, feel free to get in touch with Green USA, and we'll try to get that information out to you so you don't miss the opportunity. Hopefully you'll submit your comments personally from your point of view, but also if you want to share them with Greening USA, because as Diane pointed out earlier, we've been trying to coordinate with the Sierra Club, the climate change group that Peter Wirth represents, and probably 5 or 6 other organizations. And so we're hoping to organize some comments that might get, you know, be able to get submitted together or together apart, if you will. And so, yeah, but there's only another week left in this process. So get a move on. I think we'll close it there, Diane.